Hey, everybody. On this episode of The Hopeful Has Been, I have acupuncturist and acupressure instructor Lori Perez. She is a team leader for Tallgrass Acupressure and the owner of Crowning Touch Clinics. And before I turn this podcast over to her, I want to give a little bit of my background with traditional Chinese medicine and acupuncture on the human side, which later on led me back into the horse side. And one of the cases that stood out to me when I was in acupuncture school was what really kind of solidified the power that there is in using these acupuncture points was an autistic child that I had not worked with many autistic children, didn't run across that in massage school at all. And my first year there in acupuncture school, there was an autistic child that came in. And of course, they were not doing any needling on this child. They were doing light therapy, acupressure, and some things like that, some magnetic therapy, that type of thing over these points. And I watched this child in the 2 years that I was at that school go from being nonverbal to being able to actually learn and start to integrate back into a public school system. And, that was a huge turnaround and just an eye opening thing for me to witness the progression. Now, there were a lot of things that went into that as far as like changing diet and stuff like that. But um, that was where I was just like, oh, wow, this is powerful. Like, and when you witness something like that, and I'm sure that's stuff that you see in your clinic every day working on the human side. And I feel like, it was just, that was what really, really solidified the power in this type of modality. And so to kind of kick that off, like, as we know, this is pretty much an equine influence podcast, but sometimes I think in order for us to learn more appropriately about our horses, if we can learn about ourselves, like if we can learn stuff from a human aspect, it helps us cross it over into the equine part. So, with that being said, I kind of want to turn it over to you. And I mean, I'm going to start with the basic question. What is traditional Chinese medicine, and why do we use acupuncture, acupressure? Kind of give us the whole 101 on it.
Big questions, right? Well, what is traditional Chinese medicine? And we see often the acronym TCM, or of course, in this model, we'll see the acronym TCVM, traditional Chinese veterinarian medicine, right? Mm-hmm. It's just the same. It's just a matter of your license and your your ability to practice it, what you're going to call that practice. And we have several branches in there. I mean, we actually have 8 branches, but we have several that we use more in our equine world. But what is TCM? Sorry, we're live. TCM is the study of nature, basically, and how that applies to health, how that applies to prevention, wellness, and care of our equines. So going back to what I was just saying with modalities, we have, of course, we're talking about acupressure because that is one branch, and there is the massage branch too. We call it Tuina, but Tuina is the branch that includes actually even bone manipulation goes in there in the classics. So we have everywhere from just pressure to massage techniques to bone setting to stretching and rehab. That's where that falls. But one of the important points that we've talked about acupuncture already, and one of the important points is the points are the same. So it doesn't matter, like your story that you shared with the child. Of course, we don't usually needle children, and there are some schools of thoughts that we don't needle animals or young animals either, because it's just too invasive, and we don't need to usually elicit change in a young animal's or person's body. But we mentioned that we can surprisingly get change without doing a lot of invasive stimulus of the points. So whether we use acupressure, whether we use acupuncture, whether we use the light therapy, the magnets, the oils, massaging the points, it does not matter. The points are the same. The points are the energetic powerhouses that we're talking about. Traditional Chinese medicine is the model that teaches us a pathway to being able to individualize a session for any human, animal that we might be encountering and asking for our healing assistance. So it gives us nature as the model to view and overlay that onto the body in a tried and true system that's been around and documented and recorded and written for 2,000 to 5,000 years. That's why we have traditional Chinese medicine. They were good stewards of their records, their medicine and their records, where other cultures weren't. In ancient times, shamanism, healers, medicine men, the herbalists, they all were verbal traditions many times. The Chinese did have storage written in archives of this work, and that is why it has stood up to time. And also, it was just one of the more ancient cultures. So as the Chinese were spreading across Europe and Asia, they were also spreading some of their medicinal techniques. We find them all over Europe as well, right? In our
That's awesome.
foundations of, even Swedish massage, for example. I mean, the Northern Europeans, they cup, they gua sha, right? And they're known for their massage, but they actually learned that from Chinese invasion.
So how often do you feel like people, how do I want to ask this? Like the whole reason that I wanted to open with that story is because I feel like so many people think that you have to actually put a needle in a point for it to be effective. How often do you find that people don't realize how effective acupressure is?
I think very, very often. As a matter of fact, I'll make a little bit of a confession. It's kind of a little bit of an embarrassing thing, but it's kind of an ego thing. And I don't think we're all that separate from it. When I first decided to study animal practices, it was because I always had a desire to work in animal medicine. But my choices took me in the human path. And my hope was that early on that an acupuncture law would be passed within the states for acupuncturists to do work on animals. And that hasn't happened yet. It's an interesting dilemma because all of our peers have the right to practice on animals. Massage therapists can, non-veterinary, right? Massage, PT, chiro, pretty much everybody except licensed acupuncturists have the ability to practice on animals. So I was just assuming, I came in, early in the late 80s into acupuncture for humans, and we didn't even have licensing laws for humans then. So as we started licensing laws for humans, I thought the animal laws would follow quickly behind. And I have now realized 30 years later that that's not the truth. But about 15 years ago or 10 years ago, formally, I started studying more about Chinese medicine and the animals. And I started studying with tallgrass in 2013. So we still don't have an acupuncture law for licensed acupuncturists to practice on animals, except for now in 2 states, and that just happened in 2023. So it's a very, very new. With that in mind, there's no place to even train. I mean, we do have our first program open in Arizona now to start to train us. But here's the thing, guys, it doesn't matter. So I tracked it a little bit. When I first stepped into acupressure, I had a little bit of an ego because I was an acupuncturist, right? And I had been practicing for already, quite a lot of years before I started to study animal medicine. And so I kind of had a little bit of an attitude that just being able to stimulate the points on the surface was not going to be as powerful or as potent as what I could do with a needle. I quickly have been proven wrong. Case study after case study after case study, clinic after clinic after clinic, the amount of change that we can see elicited in the intentional touch Informed, knowledgeable, intentional touch blows your mind away all the time. And it doesn't matter, once again, if you know why you're stimulating a point, it doesn't matter what you stimulate it with. You're going, the idea is that you have to have energy flowing in the body. I mean, that's what makes us alive. And that disease is an imbalance of flow. So if you're lacking flow, then you're lacking nutrients into those tissues and those cells. And so it doesn't matter what you use to propagate that change. If you do it with intention and knowledge, you're going to be powerful. And there's some things that I've learned later on, actually, just even recently, for examples that animals conduct energy better than humans, not just because of our mindset, right? That can definitely get in our way, but just because of the amount of keratin they have in the body, just because of their cellular turnover rate, because of the amount of fluid they have in their body, because of the amount of electrolytes they have in the cells, all of these different things that make them a little bit more of a easier conduit, if you will, of
Right.
change, right? An easier conduit of change than what we are sometimes. And so
Well,
that
and at the root of everything, I mean, the body is designed to heal itself.
yes, it
And
is.
so, like when we're talking about using healing modalities, like we're talking about like, oh, this equipment heals, or this modality heals. And really that's actually kind of a misstatement there. What we're doing is, we're not trying to force the body into doing something, like, because you can't. The body's protective mechanisms will take over if you're trying to force things. But basically
That's
what
right.
we're doing at the root of any modality is we are enhancing and encouraging that body's natural healing ability.
And let's rewind back just a little bit on something you said that's really, really important. The body does have the ability to heal itself. And sometimes that healing, overreaching correction is the cause of the imbalance and the disease. The body's not able to make or hold the correction. The body doesn't need us to help it know how to heal. The body knows that. It's programmed in the cellular DNA, right? The cells know their
Mm-hmm.
job. The meridians know their job. The points know their job. It's when things are in the way of that ability for them to perform. Like a chronic injury has not been completely cleared. There's lack of nutrients in the cell. There's
Right.
a scar or an adhesion blocking flow through the pathway, the fascia or the meridian. So it's not that the body doesn't know how to heal. It does. It just needs some assistance and some help in getting that momentum and that movement headed in the right direction. We talk about a pendulum swing. It's the body, right? The law of inertia, everything's always in motion and trying to achieve balance. So we need to help that pendulum swing. So I just wanted to kind of roll us back and say, the body is already healing. It's in its inability to make the correction that many times that's when we're going to become involved, because it's not until we see symptoms, right?
Right.
That we usually use the model. Now, we hope our people that would join us in this work, that we start to use the model which you and I are both promoting, which is the preventative model, right?
Right.
Let's prevent these injuries in the beginning. We know there's a propensity for it, or there's been a past history. Let's prevent it. And so then that's a beautiful thing. We don't have to do such heroic work, but in the meantime, usually we're not coming on the scene until there's been a symptom, right?
Yes.
And then the symptom,
They wait till a crisis to call.
there's a crisis, and then many times you're right, the crisis involves a vet or a physician,
Mm-hmm.
if it's a human, and then we have to swing the pendulum way out of balance to help the body with its correction through medication or more heroic measures, and that stops the disease process, if you will, but it doesn't necessarily bring us back into wellness and health.
Yes.
And that's where our work is really important, and you will see crazy good results when you start thinking of it that way.
What is the difference? Can you explain a little bit, since you kind of led into that? What is the difference in a Western medicine style of thinking or a style of diagnosis versus a TCM or an Eastern medicine thought process? Because they're very different. But how would you explain that to somebody who was not familiar with either one?
All right. Well, again, I mean, these are, can be topics that we could, go really deep into, but basically the easiest way I'm going to explain this, and I'm not going to knock Western medicine, because I'm going to give you an example of using natural Western modalities. Okay. Like
Okay.
herbal medicine from a Western standpoint is the same as the allopathic model. So that's what we're really talking about. The allopathic model versus the homeopathic model, or the traditional Chinese medicine model, or the Ayurvedic model, right? Those nature-based medicines, right?
Okay.
And the difference is, so it doesn't matter if we're talking about the allopathic model, it doesn't matter if we're going to use a drug or a herb in the example I'm going to give you. Okay. The model is that we use an opposing force to treat a symptom. So if we have a bacterial infection, we use a bacterial killer.
Okay.
Right? That's an opposing force. If the body's too hot, we make it cold. Still some balance. Chinese medicine still has some of these concepts in there, right? But if, for example, one of the ones, so the Western model still is opposites attract. We treat with opposing forces. Okay. And we treat typically to a symptom. You have inflammation, give Tylenol, right? You have a fever,
Right.
give Tylenol, shut it down.
Right.
In natural medicine, we go promote it. The body's trying to burn something off. We need to help it. All right. Now, there's a balancing act within that, right? We don't want to let, for example, the inflammation do harm.
Right.
Now, the homeopathic model is like treats like, right? The TCM model is both almost, because the TCM model is you have to bring everything back into balance.
Right.
So it can have like treats like and opposites both in there, but it's always about restoring balance back. And it's not about suppressing ever. Western medicine now, in its more modern times, can be very much about suppressing
Yes.
the reaction, because the reaction is uncomfortable or the reaction is unsightly, and we just don't want to deal with it. And that's been the bigger shift. And we're never in any natural modality talking about suppression of symptoms, right? The symptoms are the body's way of showing us the law of integrity, what we call the law of integrity. That which is inside will show up outside, and we got to be paying attention. And it's changeable. So that's another thing that we always look at in natural medicine versus Western versus Eastern. It's changeable. So in Eastern medicine, if you have reoccurring upper respiratory infections, reoccurring bronchitis, and instead of just continuing to give you antibiotics or autoimmune or an immune suppressant drug because you keep getting sick, so we're just going to shut down the immune system. Instead, we're going to say, why do you keep getting them? When do you keep getting them? What happened before, during, and after what happens, right? Like what could be our triggers? How do we restore you in balance? Is it productive? Is it non-productive? Is it cold? Is it hot? Like we're going to look at all of those pieces. Now, we love heroic medicine, right? I mean, if we break our leg, cut our arm open, have a raging bacterial infection, we want those really extreme swings of the pendulum that Western medicine offers to break, to crush, the life-threatening event, if you
absolutely.
will.
Yes.
But
we appreciate our emergency room workers every day.
Amazing what they can do, putting us back together, heart attack, right? But what about after? Okay, here's your business, the rehab process.
Absolutely.
The rehabilitation process is what swings us back to health. and helps determine that are the things that happened in our body in the past. No, they never are. We always bring every single thing that happens to our body is brought into the present and to the future in the way that we've dealt with it. So we had to have a heroic measure, right? Let's think about that one for a minute. It's always there. It doesn't, and then by the way, this is mental, emotion, physical, right? It all comes with us into the now and into the future. But it depends on what we've done with that after it happened.
Right.
After the event happened, what did we do? Right? Because that's what we care about. We care about our future longevity. We care about our equines' longevity, right? Their comfort and their ability to perform. So, and that's where
Absolutely.
rehab medicine comes in. And so then, like you and I have had so many great discussions about, if we have a system, which we do, that you can fall back on to always know the way, the pathway to making your decisions on what type of therapy and what type of modality and what type of things do you need to do, including the points and the meridians, but what kind of stimulus do you need to do? What's in your toolbox that you can use to help bring this animal back into balance, either from, helping them move through a traumatic event and heal quicker, like in acute rehab therapy, or in the long-term rehab therapy piece so that they can get back into their performance. And still, what's the biggest key for any performer? Prevention. Right? We
Absolutely.
don't want to be treating it after the race,
For sure.
before the next event. So anyway, how I know I didn't go into a lot of details of Western and Eastern in a linear thinking. I want you to think about the differences.
And I think to kind of summarize that, it's the difference in, are we treating based on a list of symptoms, or are we looking at the whole individual? I think if we simplify
exactly
that down,
right.
that's looking at the whole individual as that unique individual versus, well, I've looked up and I have 5 out of 6 symptoms on Wiki. And
One of a great example that we could latch onto for this would be, and I mentioned it when I first started talking, is herbal medicine. If you look at herbal medicine in a Western thinking standpoint, you go, okay, what symptom do I have, right?
right.
And then you'll have a match to that, like usually an herb that is a match to that, or a medicine that's a match to that, or a therapy that's a match to that and that specific tissue, right? But
Correct.
in Eastern medicine, almost all of our formulas are formulas, our herbs are formulas, because you can't give the same thing to every single individual. So
Right.
say we had one substance that was the base foundation to help, say, muscles relax, but the formula for you and me still could be different based on our individual constitutions and conformations. We could make that individualized. So if you had a history of being cold and worse with it when it's cold, and I have a history of it being worse when it's hot, we might modify
Need 2
that
different formulas. Yeah.
Yes. With the
And does
same
that
base
get into a little bit
foundation.
of 5 element?
Huh?
Can you talk a little bit on like 5 element, because doesn't that kind of circle in with
Yes.
it?
Yeah, so because TCM is a nature-based medicine, so TCM is the modern version of bringing all of this work, thousands of years of ancient healing arts together into a comprehensive package that can be taught, right?
Right.
But we talked about all the branches, and we talked about the origin that I'm sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought for just a second.
It's okay.
Also, because my dogs are barking like crazy. Say it. Ask me the question again.
So explain a little bit about like 5 element theory, because
Okay.
that's always
Yes.
been something I've been drawn to, because I love
Yes.
that there's an emotional tie to every organ. I love how
Yes.
it's seasonal. I love how there's a smell that goes along with it.
Thanks
Like,
for getting me back on track, Summer. So that's where I was going to go. So TCM is is the comprehensive accumulation of what we know now, but the original was the Tao Te Ching. It was a study of nature, and that's where the 5 elements come in. So the foundation of the medicine was really just what did they have to go on? They couldn't look it up on Google. They didn't, they had to just look at the skies, look at the seasons, and look at nature. So they determined that there was 5 seasons in China, and they also had 2 main demographics of topography too, coastal and mountainous, right? So things were a little
mhm,
bit different in those climates, but more different in how they used the medicine. We got a lot more herbal medicine out of the mountainous regions and a lot more hands-on modalities out of the coastal regions typically.
interesting.
But the 5 elements came out of the study of the Tao Te Ching, and really, it's a wonderful study. Again, versus trying to think of this as a memorization, you're going to memorize certain aspects, but if you can start to think about living in it. So we have 5 seasons. We have spring, summer, late summer, fall, and winter.
Mhm,
And each one of those seasons has an aspect attached to them, just like you would think. I mean, like, what would we guess that summer aspect is, right? The days are longer, it's warm. So all those things, right?
right.
More energy, more movement, hot, warm, sun. So that's our fire element. And you've got them on the back behind you there. So within each season, there is an element that represents that season. So the spring is the wood element because of growth. The summer is the fire element because of the long days and the heat.
Right.
The fall, late summer, early fall is the earth element because we're getting ready to prepare for harvest
Mhm,
and getting ready to reap what we sowed in the earth. And then we have fall, which is the harvesting time, which is the element of metal, right? Which is the harvest, represented really by the tools that were used, and also the time to start to store energy for winter, which is water. And water represents the replenishment and nourishment of the body. So within all of those 5 elements, we have not only the season, but what the seasons represent. So I'm not going to go into each one of those because you can find those in um, the AccuHorse book, the famous book that got just about everything in there.
right.
Um, and you can start studying in a place like that and start. But I want you to think about the aspects. What do they make you feel like? What does summer make you feel like? Not summer Terry, but summer the season. Both make us feel
Well,
happy.
and like,
Right.
and one thing that like I was thinking about, like, too, like in excess, like I just finished up an EPM podcast where, we talked about a lot of those horses while they're having EPM issues are pretty heat
Mm.
intolerant. You don't see
Yes.
as much EPM in the dead of winter. Now there are other
Right.
factors of we don't have as many carriers of the protozoa out migrating around because it's wintertime,
Right.
but also, too, because there's a leaky gut component, so you
That's
get
right.
into the small intestine,
That's
and that and
that's
and then it's
right.
exacerbated by the heat.
So EPM is a diagnosis. So if you have a parasitic invasion, then not every are you going to treat every single animal the same with parasitic invasion. That's Western medicine, and so
Right.
you're going to get some improvement, through anti-parasitic treatments that the vet offers, or treating the side effects, right, of
Mhm.
the reaction. But this is a great example of it doesn't matter as much as what strain the animal's exposed to, unless you're matching, say, a probiotic or a drug to that strain, as it
Right.
does what is the animal giving you. Are they a chronic carrier, but the parasite's still there and it's not active in winter? Why? What makes it come out in the summer? Then we have to look at heat, inflammation, right? And so when you start to think in terms of the seasons, in terms of the tissues that the different elements nourish, and what happens, like you said, okay, so now if I have EPM, I have a parasite, where does it go? Like, where does it live? And what kind of destruction does it do? What tissues do I need to support after the initial anti-parasitic response?
Absolutely.
And that's why every animal is going to be different in their ability to clear that in their DNA, in their constitution, their conformation. What's their living environment? Do they have any underlying things going on? And then, you know, beautiful example of, we all want to know, what do you do for EPM? Well,
there's no one fits all thing. And that's the thing that everybody wants. And I think that too, like, to circle this back into acupressure or acupuncture, if you're working on the human side, is everybody wants, I want these 3 points. I want you to write me these 3 points. And the formulas are great, but I also feel like if we are just locked in on looking at a simple formula, we're going to overlook or not notice something else because we're not looking at the individual.
Right. And this is why we talk about from the very beginning, observation skills are the most important skill. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we have a process in our education about helping you get through those observation skills called the 4 exams, right? Which takes all of what we were talking about, the 5 elements, also the physical body, the environment, and everything into accountability, not just the diagnosis. The diagnosis or the verbal history is only one piece of that.
Right.
You know, I can't help it now because here it is, because I have to always tell my joke, you know, and you led me right into it. And my rude joke, which is always like, use all the holes in your head and use them accordingly. 2 eyes, 2 ears, 1 mouth. So look, listen, sense, smell, do all of those things. The last thing should be the verbal oral history. And we put so much evidence on what we choose to make decisions on based on the story.
Yes.
Right. Instead of the observations. And so one of the things, what do we talk about all the time? You talk with your rehab students too. Trust what you see.
Absolutely.
Trust what you see, despite what you've been told. That's where miracles happen in natural medicine, right? Because if we show up, and I love this because it holds true in alternative medicine, and it absolutely holds true in the training of our equines. You must work with and interact with the horse you have today in the moment, despite the story, the future story, the backstory, the owner's story. Despite the story, you still must address what you see today. If you are going to treat an EPM case and it's the middle of summer and you show up and it's 100 degrees and that horse is just either, you know, off its rocker, irritated, could be one example, right? Heat causing irritability, or so lethargic, you know, because it's so hot that it's just, you know, nose on the ground under a tree. Then you need to be able to be adaptable enough in your skills to make the adaptation for that animal.
Absolutely. Right? And I want to touch a little bit on the emotional aspect of it. You know, I see horses every day that are aggressive and sometimes point blank dangerous. And the owner, the vet, the trainer, et cetera, they go, oh, this is just how they are. This is just how they are. One, by nature's design, they're a prey animal. They are a flight animal. Aggression is actually not even in their natural nature, unless, you know, you back one into a corner, or they're protecting a foal, or they're a stallion protecting a herd. Like, absolutely, there are times when it is appropriate for a horse to be aggressive. But if your horse is aggressive and all you're doing is grooming, or you're trying to saddle, or it is, to me, it is so important to, I don't know, force people to start to understand that is not normal.
That's right.
And then we circle that back into, you know, how it's affecting the organs. one of the case studies that I used when I was in human school was there was a family member that I had never met, that was on my grandmother's side of the family, that had cirrhosis of the liver and was not an alcoholic, was not a person that drank. But I remember my grandmother telling stories of this individual having these bouts of anger where he was so angry that they moved through the household like church mice very quietly, and nobody talked for about 7 days at a time. And then, they would progress past that, and then, come back and anger would happen again. And, so as I know through my studies, anger is the emotion of the liver, which,
Right.
The other great example of that is if you ever met an angry drunk, like, there's that liver fire.
Right.
But
Right.
crossing over to horses, a lot of times when those horses are aggressive, we find stagnation in the liver points.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's important. So we're talking about the five elements, and every element has an emotion that it rules. Every element has a tissue that it rules. Every element has a part of the body that it rules, a fluid that it rules. So it gives us a lot of information. So we have all the emotions, but you said, I think you made this statement, the horse isn't going to act out like that unless something is wrong. And that unless, I mean, that's the only answer. Animals in general, but a prey animal specifically, do not have emotions for anything except survival. So if they're turning on their emotional, so right, they need safety,
Right.
food, shelter, and social life, basically, right? They're pretty easy. They really kind of four things, right? With the main things that our horses need. But they are designed for survival in a social environment, right? They are not designed for survival solo. There's a lot of things with them in their energetics, in their energetic dynamics, and their sensitivities that rely on their social structure. But they do not act out on an emotion except for survival. So but now here's the difference. Your animal that's in pain is going to react and express that emotion differently depending on their conformation, constitutional, and their environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like what's going on with them. So an animal that's already constitutionally hot, fired up, you put them in the heat, put them in the summer, they've got pain in their foot, say they've got laminitis or navicular, that's hot, it's on the fire meridian, and you're going to probably have a pretty explosive situation.
Right.
That exact same condition, say the navicular or laminitis, in an animal that has a different conformation or constitution might look depressed and withdrawn and in the
Mm-hmm.
shade and not eating. Okay. And they could have the exact same Western medical diagnosis. And what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Are we going to treat the one that's running on three legs, limping around, pacing the fence line the same? Or are we going to, as the one that's standing three-legged in the corner of a stall, not coming out?
And the sad thing is, as therapists and practitioners, I feel like the one that we will get the call for is going to be the one that's acting out and dangerous. And the one that's just standing there with his head hung, they're going to go, oh, he's fine. He's fine. We've entered the barrel race this week and he's fine.
Now,
and
that's an interesting concept, right? Because we could possibly miss the one where things are going to a deeper, more concerning level versus the one that's giving us a lot of, right? Is your horse an overreactive, sensitive type who's a big wuss? Or is your horse super stoic and you don't even, I have a horse that, like, I've not known that she had an abscess until the farrier showed up and goes, she has an abscess. Or she blew an abscess. I go, you never would have known it. Didn't take one lame step. Never would have known it. And I might have another horse that has like, there might be a little abscess or a little bit, but they are three-legged lame hopping around. Right. okay, different personalities, but they're going to express their pain through different emotions, whatever is based on their survival for them. So if the agitated horse it's pacing the fence line, it's because it feels like it has no other choice but to
Right.
display those behaviors, anxiety or whatever we want to call it, right? Agitation. And the horse that went into the stall three-legged and stood in the corner didn't feel like it had any other choice for its survival than to go somewhere quiet and dark and still and hope that the predator wasn't lurking, right? So it's kind of we kind of a generalized piece, but I think a good example on you could in both of them could have come with the same veterinary diagnosis
Absolutely.
of
And so
laminitis.
how do we teach, in your opinion, how do we teach these things to owners? Like I realize, some of it is general horsemanship and um, you know, behavior classes and there's stuff that, it's outside of what we teach, but like what are your recommendations? Because I understand as somebody that has studied this a long time, there are so many aspects to traditional Chinese medicine and to utilizing the acupressure points. But I don't want to like misconstrue that on this podcast of like, oh, well, if you haven't studied this for 30 years, you're not going to be smart enough to do it. Because
Oh,
I feel like we overcomplicate things. So I
me
don't
too.
want us to lead into a direction that this is not something that is achievable for the average horse owner to learn, because I feel like it is. Now, I wouldn't expect somebody that's been studying for 6 months to know what you know after 30 years, obviously, but
Right. I just had this conversation with my husband getting ready for this podcast, and he went to, kind of threw some debate at me about it. But I'm going to stand by my statement, which was I said to him, I said, it's so fun to do this podcast with Summer because we have some history in common, right, with our studies and when we
right,
started, right?
right.
And I went human and you went equine, and here we are back together now, bringing it back together.
Mhm.
But 30 years is how long I've been licensed and practicing, and I've done thousands of cases. I mean, like 6 days a week, 10 cases a day, right? And I feel like I'm just as much in kindergarten in Chinese medicine today as I maybe ever have,
Right.
because it's that great. You get to
Yeah.
play with it, you get to live it, and you get to interact with it. And listen, he goes, there is no way. He's like, you spew Chinese medicine like it's, your birth language, right? And I'm like, not in a scholarly sense. It's been 30 years since I've really, really deeply interacted with the classics, right?
Hmm.
I couldn't lecture you on those classics today. Does that, I mean, what does that mean to you? Well, it means like where we put our focus and our energy is where we excel. Okay.
Right.
So I'm a clinician, I'm a practitioner. I can give you lots of PowerPoint combinations, lots of ways to get there. I can, and anybody can get there because that's what we're teaching: observation, knowledge, and intentional touch. That's all. A little bit of knowledge goes a long way, right? A long,
Right.
long way when you're thinking about it intentionally and you're thinking about adapting it to that animal. It is no different than if you showed up to train and you had a specific agenda in mind and everything just showed you got to do something different, right? I mean,
Hmm.
you just have to meet the animal where they are, and if it can be that simple, it is that simple. And we do have a nice roadmap to get you there. I take you through, I talk to you about it, take you through observation. That's key. Learning to observe the animal, everything about them, from their behavior to their environment to their hoof to their skin coat to their tail, their mane, their eyes, their facial expressions, all of those things. And you just practice it, you live it with your own animals, and boom, pretty soon you're just able to just download that information into your brain and go, this is really looking like a wood imbalance, right? Because I know what spring looks like and feels like, and I know what belongs in there. So there are some
Right.
things in Chinese medicine that you do have to study and that you do have to memorize. But they're the things like we're talking about, like what tissues and emotions go into what element and what point does a certain function and where is it located. And we teach you that. But in the meantime, what we want you to just be thinking about is the process of observation. How are they doing in their environment with the things that we talked about? Safety, food, water, shelter, social, right? Are all
Right.
of those things met? And then start, we take you through a process of looking at the bladder meridian, which a lot of people are familiar with because it's our top line and it's associated with the spine. So it's, but we have a nice flow chart that takes you from being able to look at the animal from a more superficial level and get started with like, hey, their back's out, their neck out, their forelimbs out, all the way to going into deeper evaluation processes to look at internal medicine connections as well. And certainly encourage the principles of balancing the emotions, because an emotion, and as we know, it doesn't matter if it's animal or human, and an unresolved trauma or emotion is being held in a capacity for survival or coping is going to get in the way of any physical healing. So we got to get through that too. And we're not putting our human emotions on the animal. We're talking about the way they're behaving and interacting in their environment and their social network, right? Are they
Right.
grumpy? Are they? So anybody can learn this medicine because it is the foundation of what anybody's doing already. If you're touching an animal with anything, your hands, your energy, a laser, you're doing some
Mhm.
form of traditional Chinese medicine because there's not a single point out there that we're putting therapy or modalities into that doesn't have an energetic effect on the body, or why are we doing it? Right?
Right. Exactly.
It's just fact. We're stimulating energy points, and those are acupuncture points or acu points. Sorry, I used the puncture word, but acupoints, right? So it doesn't matter. Once again, they are the power points, they are the energy houses, and we have access to them. And you don't even need to start with knowing where the points are. You can just start knowing, like in the charts, where does the meridian go? If you have something going on the foreleg, on the lateral side, just understanding the meridian and its connection to the fascia line can give you some power in your
Mhm.
points to be able to connect deeper into the body with your therapy. That
And
makes sense.
when we're talking about the connection of the organs, we're discussing an organ usually when we're talking about a meridian or in correlation to the points. But I sometimes I feel like people get confused. Like, okay, let's say that we are um, needing to assist the kidneys, or and then you have the people that come back and go, "Oh, I had blood work done. My kidneys are fine." Can you
Mm,
explain a little bit about what we're doing
yes.
in connection with the organs, especially when Western medicine tells us, "Oh, well, you don't have a liver problem. We run blood work, like there's nothing wrong with your liver." And then they go,
Yet.
"Oh, well, my acupressurist or my acupuncturist said that we need to balance the liver."
Yet. And let's put the word in. There's nothing showing up on the diagnostics yet.
Correct.
Because remember, okay, so we just go back. So all 5 elements have um, organs, tissues, pathways that they have a job. All the meridians have a job, and their job is to take the energy from the powerhouse. The powerhouse is your point, and a lot of those points are found in the big muscles, right? Because our big muscles structure is like our battery packs, right, in the body.
Hmm.
And so those points, we have to tap into them, but then we have to be able to have conduit. We have to have, electrical pathways, if you will, the wiring system. So the meridians are the wiring system that take the energy to the different parts of the body that need it. So the problem is that we're using it very linear in a Western medicine sense. So if we use kidney dysfunction, yes, all of the things that we think about that are associated with the kidney in Western medicine belong there. But also, so does the fact that the kidney in Chinese medicine is also associated with the adrenal glands. So it's all hormone regulation. The kidney is associated with our DNA. So it's our genetic makeup. So it's the kidney energy that is brought into conception. So our we talked about in the elements, constitution and conformational types, right? So we all come into this world with our DNA, and that's determined by our kidney, adrenal, meridian, and organ. And that's going to set a stage for how we respond to the other things we come in contact with in this lifetime, right? Remember I said we bring it all from the past into the future and into the present. And depending on what happens with that is what it looks like once we get there. But everything comes with us. So you could have not a problem in the actual organs function of, discharging uric acid and filtering urine and getting rid of waste to the bladder and getting it out, might be functioning just fine. But the other aspects of the kidney, where the DNA piece came in, like regulating of hormones, bone structure, teeth structure, hair, mane and tail quality. So we have all of these pieces that are ruled by the energetics of the kidney meridian, right? So the kidney is just the organ. It's what holds the internal functions. And then from the spinal cord, the connection, the energetic pathway to that actual organ happens. And then it feeds out from there to all the tissues that it's responsible for. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about the kidney energy. So an example would be that kidney falls into the water element. The water element is winter. The emotion attached to it is fear. It rules bone development, teeth development, mane and tail coat, or our head hair, hormone production, not necessarily metabolism. All of those things. Opens into the low back, opens into the knee. We have all of these energetic connections associated with an organ. So it's a much, much deeper energetic accumulation of jobs that an organ does, other than what we think of it in Western medicine. Because in Western medicine, the kidney is really, just the third level of detoxification and filtration, right? Mm-hmm. And if they malfunction, it's critical. But what do? Put you on dialysis, just filter for you. But in traditional Chinese medicine, I mean, the kidney going down in their function would also mean that your adrenal function is taxed, that, what's going on constitutionally, was this a genetic thing, or was it, due to lifestyle, depletion of those adrenal reserves? Yeah. So
going back into looking at the individual, I mean, when we think about people with adrenal issues, because I'm one of them, and I mean, I have not been shy about that part of my journey through my social media, where you tend to have two types. You have the people that are extremely manic, and my adrenals are firing, that cortisol is flowing, so it's like I just feel like I need to get this done. Like it's like the sky is falling and the world is on fire. But then you also have the people that are in adrenal crisis, that they're like, I physically cannot get out of bed to go to the restroom, let alone get through a day. And so that circles back into the having to look at the individual there, because in working in our human practice, a lot of times we get really great feedback there, because we do get some of that verbal feedback from people. And so there comes back into that one size doesn't fit all, because you have to look at the other aspects of the individual to really create a plan of action.
Right. So how about this concept? Let's just use kidney and adrenal again, right? Mm-hmm. And go, is the depletion of this energy nature or nurture? First of all, like, were you just born into, being weak in this system? Or is it depletion through life's events, right? Through different traumas, or, we talked about fear. So for example, like, I'm not a kidney type, but if I have a broken ankle, which is, broken bones, right, from a trauma, Okay. And so that bone, that trauma didn't mean I was weak in the adrenal kidney meridian to begin with. But now my kidney adrenal energy is what has to do all that bone remodeling for me. So
Okay.
now I'm going to use more of that in my day-to-day life. So now when I am stressed or fatigued, suddenly now I'm susceptible to low back and ankle pain, which would be very kidney adrenal, but it's not my type. It's not my temperament.
Hmm.
It's not my constitution. So now, I've just depleted, and, this is lifestyle, right? Like I've
Right.
depleted those reserves. Now, if I had come into this world, adrenal compromised kidney type person, my ability to recover and be going, you know what I mean, might look different. My adrenals might be more fatigued through, going through an ongoing, you know, a thing where, my kidney energy is being taxed each day. Right? Does that
Right.
help?
Yeah.
But I'm more of a spleen, stomach, earth type. So I have to think about like also keeping that balanced more so.
Hmm.
Right. So your case versus my case versus somebody else's case could be having kidney stuff that we need to treat, like my ankle and my low back and my fatigue. Right? You would
Right.
go, gosh, let's get some kidney work going. But once you kind of get me stronger with that, it shouldn't keep showing up for me. Does that make sense? Because it's not
Yes.
who I am in my nature. Like I wouldn't have long-term kidney stuff. That might look different, right?
Right. So circling that into like the equine rehab, say we get a horse in with a fracture, say it's something off the track and we have a fractured splint bone or something like
Mhm.
that, it would be advantageous to go ahead and nurture the kidney because
Right.
kidney bladder has to work to assist in healing that.
Bone healing, right?
So there's where we can pull that in, whether we're using our equipment like, a laser or anything like that, or whether we're just stimulating points,
Mhm.
there would be, or maybe we're even the horse owner. Maybe we're not even the therapist. Maybe we're the horse owner that's rehabbing this horse at home. Or we have
And
the
what
horse
about,
that
just to
has joint
interject,
arthritis or something like that.
and what about, just to interject, just what about the adrenal stress of an injury to both,
Right,
to the animal, right? Just the fact that it got injured is an adrenal trigger, right?
right,
That, I mean, remember, all inflammation is launched with some type of an adrenal response, right, in the
correct.
body. That something
Hmm.
comes in. So even just that beginning support system, look, it's acute, it's traumatic. You might not even want to touch the limb, right?
Right.
That's the horse is having vet care, it's under stall rest, but you certainly, in this case, like, you could address the stress of the adrenal gland to make sure that this isn't going to deplete this animal's energy long term, adrenal
Hmm.
depletion, and support that. And then as you move forward in the rehab process, what leg is it? Which, what left, right, like which meridian's most affected. All of those things are going to then help you make better choices in, a successful rehab process.
And I think that's one thing we haven't even touched on yet is, like point location.
Mm-hmm.
So, sometimes that's one thing I like about where the acupoints are is you may not have to go directly to that area. So let's say hypothetically, like my mare that just had stifle surgery, we've had stifle, she's been very easy to deal with, but I've had horses that have come in from stifle issues that you're not going to get near that hind end until you get them kind of healed up or you're going to
Right.
get kicked in the
What are you
face.
going to do? Mm-hmm.
Where so then we can access some acupoints that are further away from that area so it's less of an insult of, okay, I'm
That's
not
right.
getting in a space you're protective of.
So
Something
we're
maybe like using bladder 11, in
exactly.
front of the scapula where I'm like, hey, at least I'm on the front end of the horse. So I've only got to worry about whether or not I'm going to get bit. And they're probably not going to be as defensive when I'm
Yeah,
farther away. But that's an influential point for bone. So
that's right.
that would help to heal something from a distance.
So in your toolbox, you have this knowledge now. You don't have, in your toolbox, you don't have just a recipe book. I mean, you have a recipe book because we have one, right? And we
Right.
have the charts and we have all of those resources to help you in your toolbox. But really, what's in your toolbox is you have knowledge. You go, all right, I can't even touch this leg because I'm
Right.
going to get my head kicked off, but I need to help this animal because I want to get them on their way to healing. All right.
Mhm.
Emotionally, physically, all of it. And so absolutely call that distal work, right? Or even off body work. But we're not even talking about going off body. We're talking about using points that are going to feed and send the powerhouse of energy to the injured area. The body's already doing that. Remember, we don't have to teach the body how to heal itself. We just need
Right.
to assist so that we are building resources rather than depleting resources in the healing process, right? I love what I just said. We are using things to build our resources, not deplete our resources. So you go, oh my gosh, that horse is going to be depleting all of his adrenal energy and, immune system energy to send all that energy to heal that acute trauma. And now we're going to step in and support that process so that he doesn't come out depleted on the other side. Comes
Right.
out healing. I'm going to just tell you a little story, but my little colt had a pretty bad injury, a laceration injury. And, the vet showed, he had to be stitched up, right? The vet showed up and did his thing and did her thing. And then it was up to me, right, to do the wound care and the healing. And I didn't do a lot. He's like young, he's upset, but, intentional touch, right? Every time I was just working on his wound care, intentional touch. When it came time for the vet to do the vet check, I had, had all of his wraps and bandages off and it was looking pretty good to me. And so I had him in a stall and she walked in and was visiting and standing and leaning and then kind of like giving me some weird looks. And I'm like, what's with all the small talk? And then finally she said to me, are you going to get my patient for me? And I said, your patient's in the stall that you've been leaning on this entire time. And she said, where's the wound?
Wow.
Where's the wound? Okay. And she was blown away. And I didn't do anything but touch. I didn't use, anything but my fingers on this young horse, but also connected with him and really worked with his emotions because guess what? I have a young horse and this was a facial laceration. And now am I going to have a horse that I can't vet, that I can't touch his face, that I can't put my finger in his mouth? So we worked through all of that. We supported his emotions. We kept his adrenals calm. And then you feel pretty good when your vet shows up and wants to know where the patient is because he couldn't possibly look that good.
Absolutely.
So that's a fun.
Tell us a couple more stories. Like what stories from your career, whether it be something on the human side, because again, I hope one of the takeaways from this podcast is not only do people want to learn about acupressure for their horses, I hope they find themselves a good TCM practitioner to go to because, I think supporting horse and human is extremely important.
Yeah. Well, one, yeah, I'm good at telling stories, so I'll be happy to tell another story. And two, I just want to say what you're saying though. Like, I think anybody that's doing rehab work, massage work, anything that they're charging money for, helping to assist in healing modalities and holistic health in an animal or a human, owes it to themselves and their clients to know some foundations of where everything comes from, right? Like to understand how to make a decision, an educated, knowledgeable decision in the moment. To me, that's just critical. Rather than having to go online and ask what to do or Google it, right? I'll still Google stuff to make sure I'm remembering everything right, or can I get a little bit better all the time? Can I do this a little bit better? Am I missing something? But at least I know where my foundation, I know where I'm going every time, right? Like I know where my starting point is every time. So one of my favorite stories, I tell it in clinics, on retreats all the time, was I got called out on a case to a barrel racing horse. And the horse was already having chiropractic and massage and PMF and I don't know what else, but basically she was just off. So she was off on the barrel and that's what the owner was struggling with. So even though she was doing all of these things and everybody had their own diagnosis, right? What they were doing is just individually going like, oh, her shoulder's a little tight, or whatever, right? And so that's the history I had, that to come and fix her because she was just off going around the barrel. So again, in using my system of all the holes in your head equally, my first thing was to not ask a lot more questions and get too much further information from the owner until I had done an evaluation myself. So,
Right.
one of the best things that I could probably share, and sometimes I have to remind myself of doing this as well, is learn to be a better question asker. When you get ready to use your mouth, then already have formulated questions that are going to confirm what you're seeing, and not get carried away with all the stuff that doesn't matter. Because that's where we can get confused. Like, oh my God, this case is so complicated. And that's usually because we're just getting too much feedback and not trusting the main pieces. So, so just, do your observations and then ask the right questions. So anyway, I just did my observation on the animal because, what I had was everybody seeing the animal and she's just off around the first barrel. Mm-hmm. So I followed the process, and the bladder meridian showed me that there was a sensitivity on the lung association point on her left side. So I followed that down the lung meridian to the so now I have to decide, is this really just structural physical right in her shoulder, in her sling, in her thoracic sling? And that would fit because it was like her reaching, right? Her reaching, mm-hmm. pulling leg to get her around the barrel. So that fit. So, okay, maybe I have a thoracic sling issue. So I followed that further, and I got to the alarm point, what we call the front mu or alarm point of the lung. And there was a noticeable, palpable adhesion there, mm-hmm. like a fibrous adhesion. So they're right there, I have to stop, right? The body told me, the right. animal, the horse told me, I have an adhesion here. I'm showing you what my problem is. And I demonstrated it by not being able to go around the barrel, right? So I started asking questions now, and the owner told me, oh, she's had one on the opposite side before. So this is not just a new thing, but they didn't pay any attention to it. It just went away, and they kept running her. So I said, well, based on everything that that I'm seeing here, I'm going to go ahead and treat her lungs, because she has a reaction on both the bladder point, the association point for lungs, and now the internal point for lungs. And not only that, the pathway fits because she was off and tight in her thoracic sling. Mm-hmm. And so that was just the process, right? So I decided I'm going to support her lungs and a little bit of her adrenals too, just to make sure she's, not stressed. Great horse. She's still doing great by her owner. But what was interesting is I went 3 times and I treated the lungs, and, she continued with her, my battery's running out. Why?
Oh no.
I'm plugged in, supposedly. Maybe.
Well, just to kind of fill the space here, like that's been my experience thus far with just learning this process is, I kind of tell everybody, I still kind of walk a little bit on the Western side and then a little bit on the Eastern side. And I feel like you have a great bridge of the two. The vet that I use, Dr. Sam Crosby, he uses part of the reason that he is so efficient with EPM horses is he uses acupoints diagnostically. He doesn't actually needle horses in his practice, but he uses different point formulas diagnostically to help enhance his veterinary practice. And I think that's why, everybody goes, oh yeah, he's the vet that'll find stuff when nobody can.
Isn't that
I
cool?
think part of the reason is because he's not solely standing just in Western medicine. He's looking outside of the box.
Yeah, just let me finish my case study. Sorry for that little blip.
That's okay. I was just filling the silence there.
I became unplugged somewhere, so that was scary. So anyway, I get called out. The horse is off, around the barrel, blah, 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 blah. So I take the history. She's been being seen by many other practitioners. Don't need to worry about her vet care. It's all being handled. And yet I have to trust my process. And my process, and of course, we don't use the word diagnostic in the non-veterinary world. I can use it in a human, but not an animal. So we are doing an assessment
Mhm.
And we have many points we assess. So our assessment starts after our observations. It starts with assessing the bladder meridian on the top. And then depending on what we find there, we can assess the meridian pathways. We can assess points called source points, where the adrenal energy and the DNA, comes up into the body. And then we can assess, I mentioned the front mu or alarm points, which are our assessment points to say, is the problem external on the meridian, in the muscle, on the channel, or is it actually going into the organ? And so
Mhm.
my case study that I gave an example was that even though she was off around the barrel and her thoracic sling was tight, everything indicated that it was actually going on in the internal organ systems, manifesting on the outside inability to perform. I treated the animal for 3 times. She moved away back to Arizona. She was coming back and forth, Arizona to Colorado. And what I found out in following her case as we went into winter, through the fall, which is the long time, is when I saw her, right entering into fall. So we continued into fall, the lung energy became a little more depleted. We went into winter, it became even more depleted because the adrenal gland wasn't able to support it. And basically the treatment just became she had to go on lung therapy, stop racing and go on nebulizers and go on. She was not showing bleeding, but she
Right.
was bleeding. She just wasn't bleeding through the nostril yet. So anyway, so her veterinarian luckily said, oh, this is a lung issue. And so I just thought, gosh, if we would have been able to follow through, possibly trusting the process that Chinese medicine said it was a lung issue, we
Right.
could maybe saved 3 or 4 months on that, was my point, right? I mean, I did some
Yeah.
acupressure, but it wasn't enough. 3 sessions, it was all we got in on that mare before she left. But I love telling the story because the client didn't give us any helpful information, really. And what
Right.
are you going to do with that information? If you would have shown up, you probably would have just, I don't know, treated the thoracic sling. If you don't have a way to go through your assessment, what would you have done? What would the next PMF person have done? Just keep putting
Exactly. Just chasing
the
symptoms.
stimulus on the same place, and really the mare needed lung support.
Right.
And my sessions, I'm sure, helped get her going in the right direction, but ultimately it continued to manifest until it needed veterinary care for the lungs, right? And then she got the care she needed. But she was telling us that through the adhesion in the pec muscle, through the inability to pull that leg back along the lung meridian was the meridian that was affected. I
Mhm.
think it's just a really great case from when we started looking at an external complaint, and it turned out that it was
To
really
be
an
something internal.
internal condition that needed support.
So
So
that leads me into another question that I have. Like, for lack of a better way to word this question, how do you handle the people that go, oh, this is woo woo, or this is, there's no foundation to this, there's no science to this, this is
well,
just
there
woo.
is foundation in science now. That's the cool thing. Unfortunately, we're going to see a lot more studies around acupuncture, right? Because we have or veterinary medicine. And veterinarians are really going to publish mostly about acupuncture as well. Um,
Right.
it's no, I've already told you guys it's no different, right? It is
Right.
not, the points are the points. It doesn't matter. They're going to have the same effect on the body depending on how we stimulate them. But there's a lot, it's really cool because when I started studying Chinese medicine, we didn't have a lot of Western medicine anecdotal studies and case studies. And now we have a lot of them. I mean, there's whole books published on them. And really, I'm not going to spend time quoting studies, but it's just proven itself. Every time we put the meridians up against a study, the points up against a study, they prove to us over and over again scientifically that they exist. And so as science is moving more towards energetic understandings too, we're actually getting more confirmation that what we're talking about is real. And it's super cool to be practicing a medicine that's energetic and rooted in nature, because that's what brought me to it, is the love of nature and being connected with animals, right? um, that it's testing out scientifically over and over and over again. So there's lots of studies out there, if people want to Google them and see them, but I think they'll find that the studies are kind of cool to research if you want to, if you're questioning them, you know, anymore, you can almost find at least a study on just about any question you have in veterinary Chinese medicine, and at least from an acupuncture standpoint. So just know that whether we needled the points or massaged them or put a cold laser on them, they're still going to have the same effect inside the body.
And to help with a little bit of the Western medicine side of things, a lot of our points are sitting on nerve bundles, nerve pathways. You know, we're talking we're talking about acupoints and their connection, but we're also, from a Western thought process, we're using the nerves in the body to stimulate as well.
Yeah, so acupoints sometimes now will be called motor points, trigger points, or all the same. Fascial lines, all of it's just a new modern way of putting language onto the energetic functions and pathways of the body. You know, we've known that the meridians exist. Every study about them kind of helps us get a further glimpse into what they actually do. But they have really decided that the fascia, right, has its own nervous system now, right? And that, you know, we're probably talking about the meridians all along with that, because the meridians have been proven to have their own nervous system that's not direct. Like the bladder meridian is our meridian that's connected to the spinal nervous system or all the peripheral nerves, but we have a whole web of what we call the meridians and the collaterals, right? There's those little freeway capillaries and pathways. I like to just picture it as a freeway in the city, right? You have the main freeway, then you have an off ramp, and then you have, you know, the major, the state highways, and then you have streets, and then you have all the little capillaries into the neighborhoods, and all of those things, and those energetic pathways, those are the meridians, and those communication pathways are what take the energy in that powerhouse, like you're saying, like the nerve bundle, like any point that we have in a muscle that is a nerve bundle, I guarantee you is going to have a name and numbered acupuncture point on it. Right. Because it was just their way of discussing them back in ancient times. The only way they had to discuss them was to put names on them, like, you know, Mountain Hollow or 3-leg mile, or, you know, again, they were viewing them like what does this look like in nature?
So like touching back a little bit on like the veterinary acupuncture. One thing I want to like throw out in my experience, just because a vet is trained in acupuncture does not necessarily mean that they are going to do a TCM model. They may not be looking at it from a traditional Chinese medicine standpoint. And that's kind of what I did with my human practice. I used, whenever I was practicing, and yes, I had went through acupuncture school. I didn't do near the schooling that you did. I went through an intro level course so that I could be legal to do trigger point needling. And that was primarily what I did. So I looked at it more from a fascia and a muscular standpoint, which, looking back, I wish I would have done that a little differently. I wish I would have done more schooling in the TCM instead of just filing right into Western medicine, because then later on, I had to loop back into TCM when Western medicine wasn't yielding the answers that I was seeking.
Right.
But I think that that's worth, you know, if you are seeking somebody to work on your horse and you are wanting somebody that has the TCM mindset, don't be afraid to ask that, because they may be needling in a Western model. Which may not be a whole horse approach like we've talked about in this podcast.
That's right. I mean, typically in the human world, we have licensed acupuncturists, and then we have MDs, physical therapists, chiropractors, nurses, you know, other licensed health practitioners that also do needling or point stimulation. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that
it may get great benefits.
Yeah, it's just that because it works, stimulating points works, period. But they might not necessarily be doing TCM. So they might be able, like, I'll give you an example. Stomach 36 on the leg, great point for releasing a shin splint, compartment syndrome, anything like that on an athlete or a runner. It's going to help, you know, release the whole tibialis muscle. but it's also a master point for the immune system. So they're not using it for that, right?
Right.
They're using it more locally. So that's so you just have to realize, just because someone's stimulating a point, what's their goal in stimulating the point? That's the difference. We can stimulate a point to release its local function, the muscle that it controls or the tissue it controls, or its internal connection. So so we have that too. So yep, TCM practitioners are not necessarily crossing over into just because you have an acupuncturist doesn't mean they're TCM trained.
Yes.
Or, well, they wouldn't be called an acupuncturist, but be a veterinarian doing acupuncture, right? Or a chiropractor doing acupuncture. Yeah. And it all works still. That's the cool thing about it.
Not to say that you're not going to get great results, but that's where asking questions about the person that you're wanting to use. Like, if you are seeking the traditional Chinese medicine mindset, sometimes you have to ask for that specifically, or you have to look up somebody that specializes in that.
Right. And so
one
there's
other
a
question.
lot of veterinarians that do acupuncture, right? And
Yes.
only a few of them that do acupuncture and TCM.
Correct.
That would be,
So can you talk a little bit about what happens in the body when an organ is removed? We maybe
when
talk
an organ
about
is
people.
removed.
Yes, we maybe talk
I
a
can
little
give
more
you
on
a
the human
really
side
simple.
here,
First of all, I mean, whenever we cut something out of the body, the pathology that existed prior to that thing needing to be cut out is still remaining. First of all, that's the first thing, right? So you still have to correct the imbalance that happened. Like if the gallbladder got a bacterial infection, why? that's affecting the whole body. So if you take the gallbladder out because it was full of bacteria, you still have a gallbladder pathology as far as TCM is concerned in the overall connectedness of the function. So I'm using the gallbladder as a good example since horses don't actually have the actual physical organ, but they still have all of the functions that system's job is to maintain. And so what happens is when we cut an organ out, the body adapts, it moves the energy around the area. But potentially scars and adhesions are a pathology in themselves, meaning they create a problem, right, through creating a blockage. So we have that to deal with. And then we have to deal with, is it an organ that other organs can pick up its function for example, the gallbladder is another good example, because if it's in a human, the liver just takes over the job. But we still have the gallbladder meridian and the pathways it rules. For example, the trapezius muscle, the back of the neck, those are all still going to be influenced by that organ. So,
and do you have to work harder to balance the liver because
you might have to, like if I have patients who have their gallbladder out, we might need to be doing more liver support, putting them on enzymes to help with the functions of some of the digestibility that the gallbladder might have been doing or helping with. So yeah, we'll add assistance in there. But I think the most important thing about that is realizing that the body will make the adaptation. So other organs will take over, but the biggest takeaway here is, why did the organ get diseased to the point that it needed to be cut out of the body? We've seen many, many conditions in the human where and this might be a little difficult concept to hear and think about for some people, but the idea would be that unless the disease is actually addressed, the disease that's causing you to lose the organ, the imbalance, if you just keep cutting the organs out, it's just going to manifest in the next downstream area of the pathway, or upstream for that matter. So an example would be like, you have a patient, say, who has a gallbladder out, right? It was diseased, take it out. Now they have, that organ removed, and then they have an adhesion in their abdomen. And then the next thing they have, or an ovarian cyst. And so now that's out. The ovary's out. And now next thing, they've got a breast cyst. And, it's still, in that case, liver gallbladder channel pathology that's never been addressed. It keeps going up the channel.
Yes. And I think that comes back to kind of cross that back over into horses. you know, like say we have a mare that has really hard cycles. You know, everybody wants to be like, okay, we'll just put it on Regimate. We'll just shut it off. We'll just shut it off.
Yeah.
I went through that with my own health struggles of, okay, you can only shut off those things so many times before it becomes it's like plugging a volcano, and eventually it's going to erupt.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
kind of like you're saying there, where you have to make that decision of, do you want to get to the root of the problem and correct these issues, or do you want to just keep slapping band-aids on a ship that's already sinking? You know, do we just keep trying to subdue things in the body until eventually we end up with a big explosion?
Yeah, I mean, we
Suppress, I guess.
always have to restore balance. So, I mean, it is, if we do not restore balance and we just keep cutting away disease, we haven't, the disease is still there, just plain and simple, right? It's just logical, right? We haven't done anything different to eliminate the pathogenic factor. So it's just going to still be present and find the next weak link to express itself in. And yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I can just simplify things sometimes that way, but sometimes I
But
feel like
I think it's a
it
great
is simpler.
statement.
Yeah. I mean, so I have a statement to my human patients. It goes back, and I've said this statement originally too, and I'll bring it forward again. First of all, we're either degenerating or regenerating. That's it. That's the flow. That's the yin and yang. It's the night and the dark. It's the moon and the sun. It is what we are doing. Cells are either regenerating or degenerating. And how well we regenerate is totally influenced. We can influence it, right? It is adaptable by
Right.
what type of stimulus we put into the environment.
Right.
So we've got an animal, they're had an injury, there's a degenerative process happening there. Now we're either going to encourage regeneration or let it just degenerate. And that regeneration is going to be dependent on what kind of things we put in there, right? What kind of energy do we give it? Some anti-inflammatory meds, some cooling calories, some lymphatic massage. So again, we're always, everything that happens in our body, mind, and spirit in the past is with us in the present and into the future. Depending on what we do with it is what it's going to look like.
Absolutely. And before we kind of wrap up here, like we had several questions on just kind of like specific issues. And before we get into you explaining your courses, and we're going to get into where they can find the education, because we're going to close on that note. Can we do just some rapid fire, like what would TCM's take on this condition be? Like, you know, you don't have to give us a point protocol,
Sure.
like just your first instinct of where you would start looking, maybe.
Sure.
Non-sweating has been a big one. So anhydrosis or non-sweaters.
Yeah. So anhydrosis, definitely problematic, right? I'm going to go back to the same thing. Is it only worse? Is it acute? Is it chronic? Is it this first episode? Is it an ongoing thing? Is this issue only present in the summer with heat and expanding of energy? Or can it also happen, in the winter with expanding of energy? There's all of these nuances to look at. I do have a nice point protocol, and it is on Tallgrass Animal Acupressure Resources has a little mini, I think, webinar slide on points for anhydrosis. But I want to even say the points that are on that slide, wonderful, make sense, but I might still do some different points depending on the presentation. So again, we have a foundation in like, okay, what systems rule the mechanism of the ability to sweat? Well, in Chinese medicine, we have something called our Wei Qi, which is our protective qi, which is ruled by the lung meridian. So that is one of the starting pieces of the lung's job, is to control the pores on the surface. And why do we have control of the pores, either opening or closing? Well, it's part of the detoxification process that happens through the skin. Those pores are supposed to be able to open and actually, through sweat, vent stuff out that the body needs to get rid of. So an animal that doesn't sweat can be in a lot of trouble, right? Because there's not just sweating to cool the body, but there could be sweating, for example, to clear a pathogen, like burning off a fever, right? A low-grade fever. Those things are beneficial. And there is some concepts about sweating is the breaking of a fever, right? To cool the body. But we won't have one straightforward answer either, because for example, we have anhydrosis we talk about in the horse a lot. It's a big concern, and we just talked about why, right? Inability to cool, inability to detox. And of course, their lungs are so much bigger than ours, so that ability to vent out and cool the body, and their body mass is even more important than with us. So even more important. But for example, in the human world, we have actually a really common complaint called hyperhidrosis, where people sweat too much, and that is really triggered by their autonomic nervous system. So that would fall into heart meridian things versus the lungs. When I talked about the controlling the pores, right? And surprisingly, I have found that some of the point combinations for hyperhidrosis also work in anhydrosis.
That's
why would that be? Well, why would that be? Because there is actually no such thing as turning on sweat or off sweat. There is only the concept of restoring balance.
There you go. I like it.
Okay.
So what about like tendon to kind of jump onto our next one? Because I'm going to kind of roll through some of these where we're not spending a ton of time on each one, because I know there's not a simple answer for it. But okay, tendon and ligament issues. We see a lot of that in performance horses. What would be something that you would think in that aspect?
Okay, well, so then we go into, the fact that we have a tried and true system where we put certain tissues into certain jobs, and tendons and ligaments belong to the job of the spring time and the wood element and the liver gallbladder. Now, why? Let's just take one quick second to think about, what do tendon and ligament tissue do, and what do they perform like? Like, if we could think about something in nature that they are most like, what would it be? Because I can picture it right away, right? And it's right on the top of our screen.
Goodness, no pressure here.
Yeah, top right corner of the screen right now. But like, just thinking about, what does tendons and ligaments look at like if we would just look at them as a structure?
I mean, I don't know, like, I guess in my mind they would almost look like, I guess I would almost see like the supporting, like the bark coming around a tree, if I was thinking about it in nature.
Yes, so branches.
Because the bark contains that inside of the tree.
And look at the branches. Like, so we have the core, right? We have the roots, right? That's kidney. And then we have the core structure, the structure. So we in Chinese medicine, we have a whole system of medicine called root and branch theory. Okay. Root and branch theory. So what is the root, and then what is the branch? So, but if you look at the say like the tree itself as the bone, right? As the trunk, as the bone, it's still all wood, right? But everything has a microsystem attached to it. But what do the branches look like? I mean, what is and they get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. They're the support system, right?
Right.
What are they actually doing? I mean, they're creating some structure that has flexibility and mobility and bendability, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Right, because the skeleton, which is the bone tissue ruled by the adrenal, it would just be a pile of rock, right? Pile of minerals, if it weren't for the ligaments and tendons putting those things together and then attaching to the muscles that create the movement, right? So, I mean, that's a great example to me of, this is how the Chinese developed their system of medicine. They went like, oh, look at this tendinous ligament tissue. This stuff's kind of weird, running up and down between bones and attaching to muscles. Kind of looks like sticks and twigs, right? And when you break it open, it's either brittle Or have you ever tried to break even the skinniest brand new green stick?
Mm-hmm.
Almost
It just
impossible,
bends,
right?
but yeah, exactly.
Right? It's
Okay.
like young, and I mean, you could twist it and okay, there is your answer. It's wood element. It's tendons and ligaments are ruled by spring. They need to be nurtured. They need to be moist. They need to be pliable. And you just think about, like, what does a stick look like? That's nice spring green new stick versus, one that's been dried and brittle and cracks right in half, right?
Mm-hmm.
Same stick.
So we would nurture
Stick.
the liver.
Yeah.
There would be what we're looking at.
Yeah. And
And I
why?
know you.
Well, just because it belongs to the wood element and it rules tendons and ligaments because of spring, right?
Right.
Spring is the time of flexibility, the time of growth, the time of adaptability, all of the things that tendon and ligament tissue have to have in their nature to
Okay.
perform well. So that's how we would treat the horse that has tendon and ligament stuff. And we would also look at, like, what's springtime? Springtime's going into performance season,
Mm-hmm.
right? For everybody, forward movement. It's performance time. So we need to be thinking about nurturing those tendon and ligament tissues when? Not in the spring, but watering them, nurturing them in the winter during the off time.
Right.
So, we can think about that, right? So again, we want to do prevention. So if you get a tendon ligament sprain in the first run out, your season could be done.
Yeah.
And now you're going to spend all season, and then you're going to go into summer, and it's going to get hot and dry, and things are going to get even more agitated. And so prevention would have said we should have been not treating, but assessing and looking at prevention in the wintertime.
Yeah. No,
Before
that makes
season,
sense for
before
sure.
spring race season, right? So that's just ways that we can use the concept. And as you can see, obviously anybody can use those concepts
Right.
with their own animal, right? The horse owner can go, gosh, I'm going to really get on this year in the winter and really be doing, if they have that tendency or they've had a past injury, they can do their prevention before, during, and after.
So what's the best wellness thing that we can do for our horses as they age? Like I know we're looking at it from a whole body aspect, but what's something that we can do that is going to be key for keeping that horse performing long into their later years?
Well, basically, again, just knowing your animal, knowing what their conformational and constitutional tendencies are, knowing what makes them better and worse, so that you know how to support those tendencies, making sure that all the main needs are met that we talked about: safety, shelter, social, are all being met. And of course, food and water. Safety,
Right.
social,
Right.
shelter, food and water are all being met. And then depending on your animal's constitution and conformation, you would be able to support them through acupressure, through massage, through food energetics, through play and training. Everything you do would be then to support that animal's nature. So as they're aging, everybody's going to go more towards kidney, because we go back to source. And remember, we came in as source energy, which is the adrenals, and we'll go out as source energy without a physical body, and that's kidney. So we're always returning to source, so that we're always going back towards kidney. So as we age, we can always support the adrenals, because that's what we draw and pull off of, right? We talk about that. Yeah, we draw and pull off of that adrenal source energy that we came in with. So the stronger our source energy was when we came in, and then depending on how much we deplete that source energy living our lives, but any aging animal, we're always going to have to go back towards supporting source energy. So supporting kidney, adrenal, and then supporting whatever their conformation and constitution is. So if they're kind of a wood element type horse that you've been running and running and running, and they did really good for you, and now they're aging out, then, still supporting their kidney, water, and their wood element. So really focusing on supporting those aspects, both in those seasons, but just all year long, to support their
Perfect.
wellness. Does that help? And
Yeah,
and
no, I think it's great.
like how to keep them stimulated too. Think about that for a moment, right? Like if you had a partnership with your animal and they were a really showy type and loved that interaction, and then they're retired or aging, how are you going to keep them mentally engaged?
Right.
And part of that's just keeping them mentally engaged with you,
No,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah, just keeping that relationship going and keeping the connectedness going. And there's no better way to do that than through touch, by the way, through intentional touch. You know, a little bit about me, but I just have a small sanctuary, but all the animals in my care have been emotional behavioral rehab cases. And you've met them, so they're pretty solid citizens, and that doesn't happen if it weren't through connected touch.
And I think something else to add on the acupressure too is it's not physically demanding where you don't have to be able to
That's
do
a really good
big
point.
maneuvers and lifts like some of the deep pressure techniques that I do, where you have to have a certain amount of physical strength to do that aspect of my job. Where the acupressure, I think it's great for the average horse owner because you don't have to be so physical.
Yeah, sorry about the massage side of things, but you know how I want to, and we have massage in this, by the way. We have tuning massage, which I
Mm-hmm.
alluded to, which is we have, many different techniques. But there's always a joke with my students, right? My rehab therapist, my massage therapist. I'm like, do you guys want to really work that hard? Because I don't, an hour session on a 1,000+ pound animal is a lot of hard physical work.
Absolutely.
But guess what? When you know what point is going to release their back for you, and you know that
Mm-hmm.
can get there and put stimulus into that point for 20, 30 seconds, or maybe 2 to 3
quickens
minutes.
things a lot.
It makes things a lot. Yeah. And it doesn't mean that you don't do your physical work, but you maybe only have to do 10 minutes of lifting extremities
Mm-hmm.
and moving bodies around versus 60 minutes of that. If you're incorporating your TCM meridian pathways, your power points, your master points, those points that give you big access.
Yes.
Yeah, but I always joke with my students that like, how hard do you really want to work at this, right?
Absolutely.
Physically, I mean, we want to be very vested in our intention and our knowledge, but the physical demand, I mean, I don't want to be physically out there, sweating my butt off, and yeah, it's so you have to think about that. It's an important point. We're laughing about it, but you really have to think about your longevity as a practitioner.
Absolutely.
Massage therapists don't have a very long career in general,
And
right?
and I think that's some of what, where I've been doing this
like,
for 19 years, I think some of what has prolonged that, even when I was working on people, is the use of points.
yeah.
Whether on the human side I was incorporating needling into that, or on the horse side I'm using the acupressure, I think it does help to get those releases and get them quicker.
Yeah. Well, and there are powerhouses, and we don't need to
Sure.
reinvent something that's been proven over and over again. So, I mean, they're accessible for us. They're powerhouses that give us great accessibility. So, yeah, don't work so hard. Is Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's trust the process. And one of the other things that we always say with this, because we are talking about an energetic medicine, is don't second guess and overthink yourself either. Trust what you see. Trust that what the animal is showing you is the truth. You don't have to fix everything in one session. You need to always start with what's the most
Right.
presentation. And they're going to help
Absolutely.
them more. Yes, like if you have a chronic thing that you need to get to, but you show up that day and that animal's hot, dehydrated, and miserable, you're going to
Got to
serve
work
them.
on that first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So let's let that roll us into the education courses. So
Mhm.
tell us all the information on that.
Okay, well, so Crowning Touch Clinics, which is my business, runs both the animal acupressure retreats at my ranch in Black Forest, Colorado, and around the country at our host locations. And I am the hands-on practical lab side of the animal acupressure program that has been around for 30 years, known as Tallgrass Animal Acupressure Resources. And Tallgrass Animal Acupressure Resources is the coursework that I studied starting back in 2009 and then more formally in 2013. It is a classical traditional Chinese medicine study of animal acupressure, both equine, canine, and feline. And they have been providing us beautiful work in both books and charts and podcasts and webinars for over 30 years. And so
case in point, charts you see behind me, those are the tall
charts.
grass
And many practitioners have these charts on their equipment. I see them all over the country on posts all over the world. So if you want to know where these charts came from, this is who we're talking about. The Tallgrass Animal Acupressure Resources program still continues to this day, providing a fabulous online curriculum from intro level TCM through very advanced studies, including some very great curriculum on even more Western pathology. So we really have some beautiful work on health and pathology that combines both Western and Eastern concepts together so that we're all talking the same language. I mean, we live in the Western world, and so we have to be able to talk that language with our physicians as well, and our veterinarians. And so I, at Crowning Touch Clinics, have taken over the educational piece of the hands-on curriculum, which is basically 3 core classes that we have had that are board approved. So you can take these just to enhance your education as a horse owner, as a practitioner, to add them to your toolbox to understand TCM, or to further your professional skills. If you have the goal to become board certified, we can take you down that pathway as well. So from entry level all the way to board certification. And I teach the core classes for practitioners out of Black Forest, October through, well, basically May through October, let's put it that way, because I'm at 7,200 feet in the mountains of Colorado. And so in the winter months, then we travel to places like Arizona and Oklahoma. And we'll have some other locations coming up as well. We'll have a canine program coming up probably on the East Coast this year. And teach point locations, teach you how to go through the assessment process that we have mentioned so many times, the observation skills needed to make an informed TCM assessment, to be able to individualize your point session work. But it's point locations. We start with the bladder meridian. We find the bladder meridian and all their association points that we talked about, assessing through the top line. We take you through the source points on the extremities, also what are called master points and influential points. So by the time you've gone through our foundation class, you can deliver an individualized session to any animal through the method of acupressure. We teach acupressure because it's the most adaptable, if you will. And then, of course, students or practitioners or owners can also add whatever modalities they would choose onto the point knowledge that they have. But it's safe, of course, for everybody to just use, acupressure or massage techniques. So we have 3 classes in our core: the Foundations of Animal Acupressure, which is a 2-day course, a 3-day course, which is Meridian Functions and Energetics. It takes us into a much deeper dive into the internal medicine piece of Chinese medicine, as well as a deeper dive into the 5 elements. And then we have a Tui Na massage course, which just helps us understand all the different types of hand techniques that can be used to elicit a different response on a point. So striping, stroking, plucking, fascia release techniques, all of those things that are different than acupressure, which is called on fa, just means to press. But we talked about, acupressure, and could it be as powerful as acupuncture? And the idea is, yes, we do start superficial in acupressure, but you can go as deep as the body needs and the body allows you to get, depending on the point and what your goal is. So we have a wonderful program that gets you started with all of this TCM knowledge to start using it right away. Our online program, and I'll have a code for you, Summer. I can give that to you now anyway, if you like.
I was gonna say, like, yeah, let's put it on there because I'll add the
So,
websites and
we
everything in the
have
description.
we have an online program. The starting point is the overview of traditional Chinese medicine, either equine or canine. Obviously, we're talking about mostly to equine practitioners here, but STPOD in caps, so Superior Therapy Podcast, or STPOD, will give your listeners 20% off the overview of TCM, which is a nice starting point. We'll make that code available till the 15th of September. And then we'll also get another code out for your students, to have access to having this on a regular basis.
But I appreciate that. I appreciate you supporting my graduates of my program,
absolutely,
because I always want them to pursue education, in any direction, because I feel like you can never have too many skills. And kind of like you said, it doesn't matter how long we're doing things, we're always learning.
right.
And if we don't continue that pursuit of knowledge, we get stagnant as practitioners too. Not only is the body designed to keep moving and flowing, so are we as practitioners. Otherwise, we're not giving the best that we have to our clients.
We need inspiration too, don't we? I mean, to stay motivated. And sometimes our inspiration is the results we get, the miracle cases, the beauty when we see change happen right before us. I wanted to mention just briefly, we talked about needling versus acupressure, and I said, I had to be kind of humbled because I had a little bit of an ego about needling. And when I actually started taking the time to actually do acupressure, I realized something that I preach a lot, that palpation is one of your best friends. Without the ability to know knowledgeable, intentional touch, because it's what gives you feedback. And I've always preached that palpation is one of the most important things to develop, but on the front end. And now I realize through acupressure, what the beauty of that is, I can feel change happening. When I just put a needle in and walk away, and I no longer have my connectedness to that client, that person, or that animal, I can't feel the change, can I? But in acupressure, I'm staying connected, and so I can feel change happen right underneath my hands. And
I work
so
with
that was
students every day that are so dependent on their machines that they do not develop that sense of touch and that sense of palpation, because they are completely dependent on the feedback from a machine.
That is exactly what I'm sharing with you, even from a needle standpoint. Now, I don't feel like I was completely dependent on my machine, because I use palpation skills and assessment skills in every case in the forefront. But then once I did that, once I touched them and then put the session work in and leave it and then come back, well, then that was it. And so I went, oh my gosh, you know what? I use the palpation skills on the front end, but not on the back end. And so it was humbling for me to actually be present and connected and actually feel the change happen while it was happening. And that really blew me away. And to see the change happen in the animals after they've been in contact with intentional touch, that's all you need to see. Because I have animals who have behavioral issues, and you can't cover that up. Do you know what I mean? They're either acting out their stuff or not. So when you see them, an animal that, was guarded and wouldn't let you touch their head, for example, come around and offer their head, there's just no denying it. And you miss that if you're not being connected. So I want to encourage and share my own personal story about my humbling results of when I started moving back towards touch away from needles, and that I realized that I was missing an important piece of feedback, and it was humbling.
Yeah. And I mean, it's like us as rehab therapists, like, we use machines in our everyday sessions, and I love my equipment.
That's
But at
right.
the
I
same
use my
time,
equipment
when
all
I
the time
have
too.
the horse that I cannot approach, I mean, one, I don't want my equipment broken because it's
Yeah, good
expensive,
point. It's
but
expensive. Yeah.
I will always start with just using my hand. If I can't safely and effectively make contact with my hand and palpation, I'm not going to go to that equipment right away because I don't want to make the mistake of overstimulating that horse when if I have a hand on them, I know that point that it's like, okay, this we're approaching all that we can do in this area and it's time to
Right.
back away. It's time to close out.
Right. Yeah, and we have something called that we use in therapy all the time. We call it diminishing returns. And so if we just kind of flood with stimulus, but not take the time to actually feel and measure feedback in the moment, we might have already had the result we needed 30 minutes ago without two more modalities or two more points or two more whatevers, right? But
Right.
so again, it's all about feedback, and our machines, some machines give us feedback, some don't, right? Some deliver therapy, some give feedback, some do
Right.
both. But
Absolutely.
yeah, we want to be cautious of it getting too dependent on just the feedback from the machine or the delivery from the machine.
Because I feel like
This
it just
is
limits you as a practitioner. Instead of expanding your skills, you're putting yourself in a box. And
well,
you
you
know, when
are,
we're
and I
looking at
just
the body, we want to break out of that box and continue to grow and expand.
and it's a good way to wrap it up because I just
Mhm.
read an article, a veterinary article on shockwave therapy this morning about the negative effects of it, right? And we're not thinking about that, but the negative effects, you know what they were? um, Inability to, the only really negative effects is that they were just doing it like cookie cutter, just after the same tissue, after the same tissue, after the same tissue. And then what they realized it was doing, it was just running interference in some cases, and they weren't getting the right feedback. And so how do you know? You know what I mean? Like
Right.
it's like knocking down the feedback. So the cautionary point of this article was that, shockwave could potentially cover up something that's not really resolved yet
Right.
if you're not paying attention to the feedback. That was the result of the article. Not that the shockwave was negative, but that if
Right.
you just kept putting it in there and not actually reading your feedback, and how are you going to read your feedback? Because the shockwave doesn't give feedback.
Exactly.
Okay, so that the
So
point
there
of the
comes in.
article was you've got to be able to have some way to read your feedback, and that's your assessment process, and that's your palpation skills and your observation skills. So
And
whether it
that's
was a
step
vet,
one of the program that you have.
that's
That is,
right.
there's our
So,
starting point.
and that's why we're here today in saying, that our rehab therapists have all these great skills and they have wonderful tools to use, but we want to make sure that they are empowered and knowledgeable when they do show up to a case like the case I gave as a case study, when they have no good information to go off of, that they're still
Mhm.
going to be able to have a really powerful, acceptable outcome that's individualized. And this will also eliminate why protocol might work on, why like you cleared up somebody's horse's low back pain in one session and now everybody's referred to you and now none of the other cases are going well. Why? Right? Well,
Right.
because we're just trying to, put a recipe on a living creature that's changeable and adaptable every day. So we need to be changeable and adaptable. That's one of the
Absolutely.
mottos here, right? And yes, hopefully, if I do my program well, what I'm doing is empowering all of you to do your specialties well. Not a replace,
Absolutely.
not a replacement for, but in addition to just make. It doesn't matter what you're doing in your rehab work. That
Yep.
hopefully this will give you the knowledge to do it better.
Adding a few more tools to the toolbox,
Mhm.
as I say.
My
So,
human patients come in disgruntled in the Western medicine world all the time because they want to tell me all the tests they had and all the diagnostics they had and all the things they had, and they still don't have any new answer. And I said, because your doctor only had that thing in his toolbox. Like, what did you expect? If the doctor only has a prescription pad to send you to a diagnostic or write you a prescription in his toolbox, why do you expect more? So we expect, I think, for doctors to grow their toolbox. But anyway, we're going to grow our toolboxes. And
Absolutely.
when I open my toolbox, I want it to be, I want something, I don't want to be out of answers quickly, right? I want to have a nice full toolbox for anybody that shows up. So,
And that's one thing I appreciate about you is you are approachable and
well,
so
thanks.
easy to ask questions to, and I really like your teaching style.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
I've enjoyed the courses.
Yeah, we were really lucky to spend some great quality time together this year and really start to think about how TCM can really support rehab therapists. Really, right?
Yes.
Like that was really our quest today.
Yes. And I think that's, that's one of the things we're working on is, how can we bring a rehab focused TCM program and out of this collaboration to
Mhm.
the graduates of my program, but also to
Mhm.
other people that are in the rehab industry. So
Yeah.
we've got some things in the works. We're
Right.
cooking on the back end here,
Yeah,
and we'll have
and hopefully,
details on
like
that soon.
yeah, and one place to start really, right, was just I would say like, starting with the online, do
Yeah,
it at your
jump
own
in the
pace
intro
was
class.
because there's some language that you just need to get around. That's plain and simple. There are some pieces that you just need to study a little bit to make it not sound or feel woo woo. But one of the
Right.
ways I want to, circle back on that is just like nature's not woo woo. The seasons aren't woo woo. We interact with them on a daily basis. So just start to think and view your world through a little bit of, the eyes of nature. Start to observe what's around you with your animals. I think you'll find if you just the students just start doing that, or our viewers just start doing that a little bit more, they're going to come up with some surprising answers, and just taking that moment to be a little bit of a better observer of our horse.
Absolutely.
What are their bodies showing us?
Well, I appreciate you for coming on the
Thanks for
podcast,
having me on.
and I will post links. All of that will
Yeah.
be in the information on this podcast, Facebook tags, where to find you, where to find courses, that coupon code, and
Yes.
so anyway,
Yeah,
thank you
and
all for
thanks
tuning
for
in,
throwing
and
yeah, thanks for throwing some good case study questions at me. um,
absolutely,
Hopefully we just got everybody thinking about the ability to start to use points, use meridians in their work. And again, I don't just use the word empowered, feel empowered to make those decisions without feeling like they have to have a Google Doc in front of them, right? To be able to know what to do.
absolutely,
And you'd be able to speak with your veterinaries and your other professionals too about this.
for
Feel
sure,
confident. So thanks, Summer.
absolutely. Thank you all for tuning in. Happy trails.